Now, I've been asked to do a snow scene, a very beguiling sort of subject, and has more pitfalls than you expect it to have, but it's all the white paper. So we'll make a start straight away. Now, I'm working from this sketch. I haven't got a photograph. I'm not very good with cameras, particularly in snow scenes, which seem to just go black and white. Now, I think the reason snow scenes are very popular is because there's a lot of white paper. It's very tempting to leave snow as white, simply because we associate snow as being white. It's not necessarily white, and it's not the reason I necessarily use white paper to represent snow. It's mainly because white is the lightest tone I've got to work with, and snow tends to be the lightest subject, or the lightest form in the subject. My usual palette, and if you look at my website, they'll give you more details of my palette. The only addition is a little bit of rose madder, genuine rose madder there, which I'm just experimenting with. Right, well, this old Suffolk farmhouse has got a creamy wall, so we'll start here. One of the reasons it's a good idea to start somewhere rather than the sky is because if you do the sky first of all, then you've got to wait a long time for it to dry before you can get on with anything else. Just vary this colour a tiny bit, occasionally a little bit of blue there. This is all sort of a bit cream, tiny bit more rose madder. Just enough water for the paint to sort of flow off the brush, and load the whole of the brush up. In this video I want to return to some of the very basic principles of painting. If you can get the principles right, then it doesn't really matter about going in for anything sort of fancy in terms of technique. Technique is a very natural thing. As that's dry, let's just put a bluey grey wash. So I'm just adding a little bit of cerulean to that, just on this here, and there's a little bit more browny, so a bit of burnt umber here. Hold the brush at the tip and stand back, and if you can, paint round things. If you want that nice clean fresh look, the thing to do is to try and paint each area once the way you want it at the end, rather than keep thinking to yourself, well, I can always repaint that and go back over it. And do some of these cobalt with a bit of burnt sienna to get some of these posts in here. Put a bit of more burnt sienna to warm it up a bit. And now for some ultramarine and burnt umber, a little bit of viridian, because it's all a little bit on the load the brush up, and if you press the brush you'll get some of that sort of attractive sort of dry brush mark. Put a bit of cerulean with that, just to change it a bit. They're only subtle changes. It's hardly noticeable. Let's put a bit of rose madder with it to warm it up a bit. Rinse. Just give it a white. It's a bit of raw sienna now. Some shuttering in this old vegetable garden, covering a compost heap. Put some cobalt. Now this is a piece of Bockingford 200-pound knot paper, and as you can see, it really takes the paint nicely. It's what I call, it makes the paint look happy on the paper, as long as you don't muck about with it. Right, let's just rinse and wait for that to dry. Now I've just had a clear up with a palette and allowed this to dry. Let's have a go at doing part of the tree now. We'll start off with Viridian and a little bit of raw umber. The trick to this is to keep changing it a little. There's a little bit of cobalt violet. Now, when you're painting any form, in this case it's the tree, bear in mind how it appears against the background. Where the background is light, or it will be light, then perhaps the tree looks a little bit darker. Cobalt violet and raw umber. A little bit of snow in that. As we come up against the sky, it's not, that's a bit too brown. I don't want really brown. There's a tiny bit more exciting colours. Put a bit of ultramarine with it. Let the paint do its own thing. There'll be a bit of raw umber. Back to the ultramarine. Have a light branch crossing in front of that one, so we'll, as we've thought about it, we can save that. Far more interesting to keep varied colour, and not only is it more interesting, it's probably more realistic as well. This is a little bit of cerulean blue and cobalt violet. Come down to a bit more Viridian and raw umber. Now a lot of this is, I'll just take that drip up, a lot of this is just allowing the paint to do its own thing. It's burnt umber and ultramarine. Now before that dries out, I always like to connect the shadow cast by the tree to the foot of the tree. This is a bit of ultramarine and rose madder. Put a bit of cobalt with that as well. Shadows cast by the sun, which is clearly coming from the left-hand side. And the shape of the shadow will actually indicate the contours of the snow. very important shadows. So you can carry on putting one or two dark shapes in. Around here there's some windows in this old shed. Sort of potting shed or something like that. And bear in mind, some of these areas are effectively will be in the background. By that I mean not necessarily physically in the background, but not an important part of the painting. So we can do them sort of fairly loosely. A bit of cerulean with that, and just take these. And then cobalt and light red. Trying out this rose madder. It's always nice to try different colours. The snow on this side of the roof is all in shadow. And then we've got the shaded side of the building. When you paint an area, try and paint the hard bit first, in other words the drawing bit. Then you can quickly fill in the rest. It's not a bit more light red with it. That way you can get the paint on over an area. If you start in the middle and gradually work towards the outside edge, then you end up stroking the paint backwards and forwards, and that's not always a good thing. While that's drying, even though it's quite wet, if I get some paint, almost the consistency of toothpaste, without too much in the way of water, I can insert this gutter and a window, and it'll just be a little bit sort of fuzzy. And merge into the background. While we're doing that, we could just darken just underneath that and do that edge there, and perhaps even come down this edge here. Well, we've got some good rich darks. I'll just get rid of some of the paint on the brush just to indicate these long windows. Again, the way in the distance, so do the gutter line along here as well. Don't do it ramrod straight or a continuous line as if you're worried about it all going wrong. Tiny bit of brickwork on this lower part of the house here, nice area of warm colour. And of course the bottom part will be starting to paint or reveal the snow on top of the hedges that run around the vegetable plots. Right, well, let's just take stock there, and I'll clean the palette and let that dry. Now I think it's time to address the sky. So a little bit of raw sienna, a bit of rose madder as well. Lots of water with this. Very easy to underestimate how much water we need for these light areas. Then some Windsor Blue and Ultramarine together. Put a bit more Ultramarine with that. If it's not quite what you want when you put the paint on the paper, change it straight away. Don't just carry on with it thinking it will do. Nice clear blue sky. If you change the nature of the sky, change it, as I've said before, out in the open. Don't change it when it's convenient, when it disappears behind a tree. Otherwise it won't read. Put a bit of light, try to warm that up. And just save that roof, come down there. So in many ways what I'm doing when I'm painting the sky here is pulling out the roof. Then we'll have some lighter clouds over here. Start again, because if you've got any Windsor Blue on your brush, then it's going to be very powerful. Seems to stay there. Okay, load the brush up and press the brush. You'll be in much. If you sort of tickle the paper, the brush will shake a bit. Press it in, and you're much more in control of it. Now these distant trees here, let's get those while we can with them. So we can get a nice soft fuzzy edge. All sorts in this burnt umber. Sometimes I'll dip about a fair bit just to try and get what I want. So here, let's make it a bit more bluey. And having a fuzzy edge there is a nice contrast to the harder edges in the other areas of the painting. Same here. Ultramarine and burnt sienna. Make it a bit stronger. Just to, if you're going into a wet wash, it's very important that the wash you go into a damp area is stronger, otherwise you'll get a cauliflower. There's an old oak tree there. Now we can afford to darken that here, this there against that, to force out the light of that on the end of that building. Let's go back a bit darker. It doesn't have to be dark everywhere. Let's have a bit of raw umber now. And some Viridian with the raw umber. just let that fight its, let that sort itself out. I do the job for you. Put a bit of green there, and also we could, while we're at it, we can start to do the Evergreen Bridging with some burnt sienna, tiny bit of ultramarine, and a bit of raw sienna. I find raw sienna is a great leveller. There's gardens divided into sort of hedged rectangles. A bit of Windsor blue and burnt sienna. And then we've got this dark hedge here, so it's really making a real rich dark. But occasionally a bit of raw umber, just to let a little bit of light in. And back to the darker green. Paint around those fence posts. Now, when you come down here, there's the let's change the brush. We've got the trunks of the bushes, and you can see the snow on the allotments and garden behind. Now there's some seed heads and things growing up here. Old stalks, and we may be able to just scratch with our fingernail some of them as they go against the dark background. Always useful, because what it does is send those background trees even further into the background by having something in front. I think we can feel our way into this old oak tree now. That's sort of sticking out here. I tend not to draw too much in the way of trees because I feel that you lose the freedom to paint it as it's grown. Just merges into that background. Just have that one stalk going above the skyline. Right. Now if that sky is dry, well, I'll just stop there and have another clear up before we do the next bit. Now I've just let that dry out thoroughly. Let's set about the chimneys now. Let's do the pots. Bit of light red, bit of burnt umber and burnt sienna now, with the colour on the right hand side, just to give an indication of the roundness. Back to the light red. Similar treatment over here. Then one bit of burnt. I'll just take this strip up here. If we go in with some stronger paint, we should be able to do the shaded side straight away, I think. It doesn't have to be a real sharp edge along there, so just save that. A little bit of light. It's nice to have a little bit of light of a twig coming across there. And while that's still wet, we'll put in the shadow, almost cobalt, a bit of ultramarine, two blues together. And we'll also indicate a little bit of the roof here, just where some of the snow has started to melt, often starts to slide down from the particularly near chimneys, where there's a little bit of heat perhaps. Back to some stiffer paint. Get that shadow, and of course there'll be a diagonal shadow across there. And we'll just soften that so it joins on to the roof. Now we can put in some of the shadows. This is cobalt violet, a little bit of raw umber, tiny bit of cobalt blue as well. Some shadows, a bit of a shadow under this eave. make it a bit more bluey. Appears again there and here. And then there's all sorts of shadows from trees and foliage. As there is, put a bit of raw sienna with it, a rose madder. All sorts of shadows coming across here. Notice I'll darken that shadow there. I'll arrange the shapes of the shadows to suit where I want my light and dark. And there's also, of course, shadows across this roof here. In a subject like this, it's the shadows which are actually going to sort of make it. Bit of dark red just underneath this here, but then these shadows come across, come down. Shape the shadows where you feel that, without distorting the truth too much, shape them in a way that'll help your picture. So you've got dark against light, light against dark. Just a tiny bit under that eave there. Be a little bit there, but not so, won't be quite so heavy there. Come back and do the window later on. And while that's drying, we could set about these trees here. A bit more raw umber here. Take a smaller brush, a bit more ultramarine. I think we all underestimate how wide trees are and the extent of the branches. And of course the beauty of putting all of this in is that everything in the behind goes back. All of this is an attempt to drive this into the background. Right. Now while that's drying, we could just have a go at this window here. Quite light on this side. Let's make it a bit more bluey. Just take up some of that excess moisture. And then quite dark on the other side. So lead lights. So where you've got a dark interior, the sun catches the lead and they look quite light. Where it's you've got a curtain drawn, the lead actually looks light. So we'll put some darks on that shortly. Just restate that. Now we can do some more work on this large tree. Bear in mind that this right hand side will be in the shade. Again, each time I go back, I'll just change the colour a bit. So notice I'm darkening it there where it's against the sky. And even though it might look as if I'm putting in a lot of branches, I'm being quite ruthless in the way that I'm picking and choosing the ones that I want. And generally the choice is about what will enhance my painting. There's one here, have a little bit darker there where it comes up against the light of the snow. It's got a branch out here. Pick it up, lose it. Don't be frightened to go over things that you feel have been successful. You know, got a nice chimney, but it's always a good idea to be prepared to lose parts of the painting for the sake of the whole. Some bluer. Blue branches which will look as if they're going out from the back of the tree. Oh, wrong number. There's no golden rule as to whether you should start at the top and work down or whether you should start at the bottom and work up. I'll just go where I fancy. A major branch coming out here. The only thing you've got to watch is you don't follow the contour of that. Beware of sort of accidental alignments, even if they where you are standing to paint, they appear like that. Either move or change it, because it won't ring true, and it confuses the viewer. You know, is the branch part of the tree, a part of the roof of the house, or is it how are they connected? One or two shadows coming around the tree will always help explain that the tree is round. If you're going to do any detail, like a little bit of texture on the bark, put it out into the light. One or two branches coming out here. Now, when you're doing this, I just remind myself I must step back to make sure that what I'm doing is not only enhancing the tree, but pushing everything behind it back. Now that that's dry, we can go back and add a little bit of this. To the window. Right, I think it's time to just have a clear up and stop and a fresh look at it. So let that dry out for a few moments, and then one final push. Now that's had a few minutes to dry out pretty thoroughly. So one or two more shadows, ultramarine, cobalt, so a little bit of the rose madder to make a nice interesting colour for the shadows. There's all sorts of obviously shadows underneath this hedge here. Just the odd shadow on the snow on these railings. Burnt sienna and ultramarine. A little bit more heavy on the ultramarine to make it blue, because although it's cold, with the sun out like it is, it's actually quite a warm light, and therefore the shadows will be relatively cool. It's the blue shadows which actually help indicate the direction of the light and the temperature of the day. Bit of light under there. It's probably a bit too warm. I'll come back and do that. Just soften that edge to get that rounded post there. And a little bit of drawing the viridian of the planks between these shutters. Then we've got the shadow across here. Some shadows from these sticks here, which will also go sort of up around that trunk. A bit more blue. Cut this corner off with a shadow. A few marks in the snow. And while I'm at it, I don't advocate doing any overpainting until you get towards the end. In fact, my little guide for myself is never paint anything twice until you've painted everything once. I feel that this could be a little bit darker here. Just bring that down on that corner and soften that. There's no need to darken the whole thing. And one or two final little raw umber, which is a sort of a heavy pigment with a bit of cerulean, which is equally heavy. Dark it with a bit of burnt umber, perhaps. Just stick a little bit of Payne's grey with it, just to darken it. One or two sort of sticks sort of coming out here. In the snow. Anything which will add authenticity to the sort of feel, the untidiness of it, really. Some raw sienna, perhaps even with a bit of aureolin. A few once you feel, just take some of those down. Right, quick look at that sketch. Darken that corner there. Just tidy up this bit in the middle of this window. And push some of the shadows across there. then stop. Now remember hang on, don't stop, just got one or two marks there. Now remember, the main object is to produce a nice, clean, fresh looking watercolour, and be prepared to make as many sacrifices as possible to achieve that. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that, and it's stimulated you and encouraged you to get on with watercolour painting in all conditions. Thanks for watching.